Euthanasia is a word heard by many, understood by few, and it is defined as the painless death of a person suffering from a terminal disease. It also has the synonym of mercy killing and the good death, which is derived from the Greek origin to convey the nature of euthanasia. Euthanasia is surrounded with much ethical debate and uncertainty as it is a continuous issue that has been discussed for centuries in many societies as to whether or not euthanasia is ethical and if it should be legal and supported between people in health settings. There's 3 types of euthanasia. Voluntary euthanasia, which is performed at the request of a person whose life is ended and the person is competent. For example, a doctor injects a competent patient at their request. Then there's the non-voluntary euthanasia, which is performed and the person is non-competent. A doctor injects a patient in the post-coma unresponsive state. Then the last one is the involuntary euthanasia, which is performed and the person is competent and has not expressed the wish to die or has expressed a wish that she does not want to die. A doctor injecting the patient with an injection who is in a terminal stage of a terminal illness such as cancer. Much research and literature reviews done on euthanasia on how ethical it is and if it was to be legalized, why and how. Euthanasia is now legal in many countries like Belgium, Canada, Colombia, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and in 6 of the US states.
Euthanasia is an extremely controversial topic. Whether it should or should not be legal universally varies between each person. Members of the Senate Legal and Constitutional Affairs Legislation Committee were required to submit to the Senate inquiry regarding personal autonomy. Many members believed that the choice to elect oneself to be euthanized is a very personal one and falls under the umbrella of the basic human right to choose. A counter-argument presented from the Australian Senate involved palliative care. Some members were concerned that if euthanasia was available and accessible for everyone, the idea and concept of palliative care would be rendered unnecessary, thus undermining the palliative care industry. This, however, was met with a rebuttal from other members of the Senate, stating that voluntary euthanasia would merely be another option. It would be complementary to palliative care and not a replacement. In a paper published by George Sandowski, it was found that many Australians are still uncomfortable and against the idea of medical professionals assisting a patient's death. A major concern surrounding this uncomfortability is the state of mind of the patient, and whether, if denied the ability to be euthanized, the patient would change their mind over time, thus avoiding the permanent nature that comes with euthanasia. The Family Council of Victoria alluded that completely legalising euthanasia may diminish trust between doctors and patients, as euthanasia contradicts the duty of care for healthcare professionals to preserve life. If professionals are perceived to readily end lives, this disrupts the dynamic between patient and professional. A major concern of the Australian Senate regards the future of euthanasia. Members were reluctant to support the initiative of voluntary euthanasia strictly for terminal cases in fear that it would lead to other forms of euthanasia, such as voluntary without terminal case.
Euthanasia is one that is covered with much ethical debate. Advocates of euthanasia strongly argue that people have the right to make their own decisions regarding death, and that euthanasia is intended to alleviate pain and suffering. Those in favour of euthanasia argue that we should be allowed to do what we want with our own bodies, so it's wrong to make anyone live longer than they want. This violates their personal freedom. Jack Kevorkian, also known as Dr. Death, was a US-based physician who assisted in patient suicides, sparking increased talk on the right to die. He assisted people suffering from acute medical conditions in ending their lives. After years of conflict with the court system, he had spent 25 years in prison after he was found guilty of second-degree murder. He had assisted with more than 130 suicides in the 1990s when he drew national attention to the questions people have about dying. Jack was famous in 1990 when he assisted the suicide of Janet, a 54-year-old Alzheimer's patient. After she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, Janet began searching for someone to end her life before the disease took full effect. She had heard through the media about Jack's invention of a suicidal machine and contacted Jack about using the invention on her. He had then agreed to assist her in a public park inside his van where he took her life.
Ethical euthanasia must have a regulated criteria to safeguard those seeking eligibility. For instance, in Victoria and participating states in the US, patients must be over 18 years old with a terminal illness and life expectancy of 6 months. Also in Victoria, the patient must be suffering intolerably to be eligible for euthanasia. In Victoria, you must be an Australian citizen or permanent resident and reside in Victoria for at least 12 months prior to the first request. A person must make 3 separate requests for voluntary euthanasia, 2 medical assessments performed by qualified and different doctors, and 1 written witness declaration requesting access to voluntary euthanasia once they have been assessed as eligible. These safeguards are in place to stop euthanasia tourism, stopping access to the ineligible. This also assesses whether the patient is competent and not coerced by others to make the decision. Once assessed as eligible for access to voluntary euthanasia, the doctor prescribes the medication to the patient but does not administer it. The patient must self-administer the drug. In Victoria, a person must be given a self-administration permit. However, if they are physically unable to self-administer or take the drug orally, application is made for a practitioner administration permit, allowing the coordinating medical practitioner to administer the substance. The person must then make an administration request to the practitioner in order to be administered the substance. Laws on euthanasia should be reviewed and changed if necessary. In Victoria, the Act will be reviewed after 5 years from its commencement. An example of a euthanasia law examination is Belgium. In 2002, the Euthanasia Act commenced for competent adults and emancipated minors, allowing access to voluntary euthanasia. Review occurred in 2014, changing it to include children to access euthanasia by lethal injection with parental consent and with a doctor's help. There is now no age limit to minors being able to access voluntary euthanasia in Belgium. From the information that has been given to you today, we end with this question. If a person had an incurable disease whose suffering could not be relieved, but had longer than 6 months to live, should they be allowed to access voluntary euthanasia or be made to wait until they were closer to death?